The sun rose like a fiery brand across an endless sea of dust, scorching the last droplets of hope from her dry and cracked lips. A rattlesnake hissed in the scrub, its warning lost in the roar of her own heartbeat. By sundown she would either conquer this cruel wilderness or perish beneath its unrelenting sky. Arizona Territory, 1882, a land carved by relentless wind and sun, where towering mesas and jagged canyons stood as silent sentinels to centuries of struggle. The desert sprawled in every direction, as if daring anyone to tread upon its sands. Little clumps of sagebrush and cacti dotted the landscape, defying the harsh conditions. Dry gulches twisted through red rock, waiting to flood in the rare event of rain. In a remote corner of this punishing terrain lay St. Mercy, a settlement little more than a few adobe huts, a saloon doubling as a general store, and a half-collapsed church with a crooked wooden cross. The main track, a rutted path more than a proper road, led farther west toward the railroad lines. But few travelers dared to go farther into the desert unless desperation, fortune, or madness pushed them. Standing outside the saloon's weather-beaten door was Evelyn Tabor, a woman of 26 years who wore weariness like a faded shawl across her slender shoulders. She brushed a lock of copper, brown hair from her forehead, revealing eyes the color of tarnished brass. Dust coated her simple skirt, worn boots, and the once white blouse she'd belted at the waist to keep from snagging on cactus spines. Evelyn carried a battered canteen strapped across her body and a Colt revolver holstered at her hip. Both were crucial to her survival. Yet, it was the tattered letter in her hand that drew all her attention. That letter bore a message from the railroad office in Tucson. Your father has passed, leaving an unpaid debt. His only property, a plot of land near the Painted Hills, remains yours if you settle the accounts in person. Evelyn's father, Gideon Tabor, had been a gambler and a dreamer, forever chasing schemes that never paid off. She had vowed never to follow in his footsteps. Yet here she stood in the middle of nowhere, burdened by an unpaid debt that threatened to swallow what little remained of her family's name. Evelyn's goal was clear: travel to the Painted Hills, find a way to keep her father's final plot of land, and settle the debt. Her fear was just as plain: the desert itself. She had never ventured so deep into this land, and she dreaded the vast emptiness, the isolation, the possibility that she might never make it out. Leaning against a post near the saloon, scanning the dusty horizon with cautious eyes, stood Zachary Finch, a wary man in his early 30s. Dark hair cropped short beneath a sweat-stained hat. He'd been a scout for the U.S. Army years back, navigating dangerous passes during the Apache conflicts. Rumors claimed he carried guilt like a hidden wound. Perhaps he'd guided a wagon train that met disaster, or maybe he'd broken trust with the wrong people. Now, he lived by hiring out as a desert guide, ferrying travelers from one side of the territory to the other. His goal: earn enough money to buy a small ranch far from civilization, where he could bury the ghosts of his past. But his fear, and the reason he lingered in small towns, was that someone from his history might catch up to him before he found redemption. Sometimes, Zachary's hands would tremble just faintly when he remembered old regrets. Evelyn had spent her last few dollars hiring Zachary to help her cross the Painted Hills region, a stretch of desert infamous for brutal heat and scarce water. They set out at dawn, forging an uneasy partnership. Evelyn, determined but inexperienced, carried her father's letter and a desire to claim what was owed. Zachary, tight-lipped and burdened by his private demons, knew the desert well enough to sense when a journey bordered on suicide. Together, they set out from St. Mercy with 2 half-starved horses, a small supply of water, and a vague map indicating a winding path through the canyons. Neither trusted the other fully, yet the desert demanded cooperation if either hoped to survive. All around them, the sun rose high, scorching the land. The trek had begun. They had traveled beneath a molten sky, dust caking their throats, the odor of heated rock and hoarse sweat lingering in the air. Each day they woke before dawn to catch the cool morning hours. By noon, the sun blazed overhead, forcing them to seek shelter under any scraggly mesquite tree they could find. Rocks glowed like embers, burning the soles of their boots if they lingered too long. On the morning of the second day, Zachary called a halt at a sandstone cliff pocked with shallow caves. "We'll camp here till evening," he decided. No sense riding in the worst of the heat. Evelyn didn't argue. Her canteen was almost empty, and her lips were cracked to bleeding. She sank against the rock wall, letting the shade wrap around her like a blessing. How much farther? She managed, wincing at the dryness in her throat. Zachary offered a tight shrug. "Hard to say. The Painted Hills are a few days out yet. Water is our biggest concern." He glanced at the horizon, where shimmering waves of heat blurred the line between sand and sky. "There's a spring marked on your father's map. We can try for it by tomorrow morning, but if it's dry—" He trailed off, letting the unspoken threat sink in. Evelyn's stomach churned. She knew the desert often turned springs into dust without warning, but she forced hope into her voice. "It'll have water," she said softly, though even as she spoke, she doubted herself. They were dozing through the heat when a stranger appeared at the edge of the cave's shade. Zachary leapt to his feet, drawing his revolver. Evelyn startled awake, scrambling for her own weapon, but the stranger raised both hands, palms outward, a sign of peace. He introduced himself as Dean Coulter, a traveler who claimed his horse had died miles back. He was on foot, he said, and near collapse. I mean no harm," he sputtered. He was a wary man, face sunburned and cracked. "All I ask is water. I've been wandering 2 days since my horse broke its leg." Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight of his desperation. She tossed Zachary an uneasy glance. They had so little water to spare. But could they leave a man to die under that merciless sun? Zachary's gaze hardened. "We can't carry 3, and we barely have enough water for ourselves." Coulter pleaded, eyes wild with thirst and fear.
"I'll pay you."
"I've got a stash of silver hidden near the Painted Hills. Help me get there, and I'll share it with you." Evelyn, torn between compassion and self-preservation, looked at Zachary. She saw the flicker in his eyes that signaled interest. Silver might buy him that ranch he craved. Yet he pressed his lips together in distrust. "We'll take you as far as the next spring." Zachary finally said, voice gruff, "Then we'll see." Evelyn nodded her agreement, passing Coulter a small sip from her canteen. The man gulped it greedily, relief washing over his face. Still, a whisper of doubt nagged at her mind. The desert had a way of revealing truths about people, and she couldn't ignore a gnawing feeling that Dean Coulter's story might be more complicated than he let on. They rode under a star-strewn sky, letting the cooler temperatures push them forward. Silence reigned except for the steady shuffle of hooves and the distant call of coyotes. Moonlight gleamed off towering rock formations that twisted like petrified giants. Evelyn ached in every muscle, half asleep in the saddle. She clung to the thought of that spring, imagining water trickling over her parched lips. When the horses faltered in the gloom, Zachary dismounted and led them on foot, using the map by lantern light. Coulter stumbled along behind, muttering about silver and revenge. Once or twice, Evelyn heard him curse the name Laszlo, but he refused to explain if pressed. They pushed until the small hours of morning before finding a suitable hollow to camp. Evelyn fought to stay awake as she unsaddled the horse, but exhaustion dragged her down. Zachary's features were gaunt in the lantern glow. He offered her a curt nod of reassurance. "Get some rest," he said, though his own eyes burned red from fatigue. As she sank onto her bedroll, she glimpsed Coulter pacing near the faint glow of the dying lantern. He cast furtive glances at Zachary and at the saddlebags of supplies. Trust was scarce in this harsh land, and Evelyn wondered if she had already made a mistake by letting this stranger into their camp. They reached the supposed spring at dawn, half dead with thirst and hope. The sun was only just rising, painting the sandstone cliffs in brilliant shades of crimson and amber. Down in a narrow arroyo, the map indicated a place where water pooled beneath the rock shelf. Evelyn's heart leapt when she heard trickling. She ran ahead, stumbling on loose gravel. Rounding a bend, she froze. The trickling came from a paltry drip seeping out of a crack. A shallow pool lay under the shelf, but it was nearly empty, no more than a muddy puddle. "God help us," she breathed, dropping to her knees. She tried scooping a handful to her lips, only to cringe at the bitter taste of silt. Still, it was wet. Zachary joined her, face grim. Carefully, they filled their canteens with the meager water. Coulter slurped from cupped hands like a starving animal, ignoring the mud swirling in the dregs. As they knelt at the pool's edge, a sudden echo of hoofbeats thundered above them. Zachary snatched his revolver. Evelyn rose, heart pounding, scanning the clifftop. 4 dark silhouettes on horseback emerged against the blazing sky. Coulter shouted, his voice betraying pure panic. "It's them! I knew they'd be after me. After the silver!" He scrabbled for his own gun, eyes wide with terror. Before Zachary or Evelyn could demand an explanation, the figures opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks. Shards of sandstone flew like daggers. The horses snorted in alarm, nearly trampling Coulter, who threw himself flat. Evelyn dodged behind an outcropping, adrenaline spiking through her veins. Zachary fired back, cursing. "Evelyn, get to the horses! We can't fight them here in the open." Another barrage of gunfire pinned them. The muzzle flashes cut through the brightening day. Coulter groaned, clenching his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. "They're the ones I stole from," he confessed through clenched teeth. "I never had a horse that died. I ran off with their silver, and now they want it back." Evelyn's eyes flashed with fury. "You lied. You got us into the middle of a blood feud for stolen silver." She tasted bitterness at her own gullibility. Zachary grabbed the saddlebags, yanking them behind the rock. "We're outnumbered." "Coulter, you worthless." A bullet whined past, cutting him off. The bandits were descending the steep path into the arroyo, shouting for them to surrender. Zachary locked eyes with Evelyn. "We'll retreat. Cover me." Despite her anger and fear, Evelyn nodded. She rose to a crouch and laid down a few shots, forcing the attackers to duck. Zachary seized Coulter's arm, dragging him toward the horses. The lead horse reared, spooked by gunfire. Evelyn risked a glance over her shoulder, blood roaring in her ears. If they didn't move now, they'd be trapped. She sprinted toward her horse, feeling the sting of gravel under her boots. The bandits pressed closer, bullets tearing into the dirt. Zachary managed to get Coulter onto one horse, then swung himself onto the other. Evelyn scrambled into her saddle, heart pounding. She fired one last shot to keep the bandits back, then spurred her mare. With a lurch, they fled down the canyon floor, dust boiling behind them. Hoofbeats echoed in pursuit. The sun, fully risen, hammered down with vicious intensity. Fear mixed with fury inside Evelyn, fear for her life. Fury at Coulter's deceit. She couldn't see how this day would end without blood soaking the sand. They managed to shake the bandits by winding through a maze of rocks and gullies, guided by Zachary's knowledge of hidden paths. Eventually, they found an overhang beneath a sheer cliff where they collapsed in exhaustion. The horses stood trembling, nostrils flaring, foam dripping from their mouths. Evelyn confronted Coulter. "You said you had silver hidden near the Painted Hills, but you stole it. That means those bandits want your hide." Coulter, ashen-faced and still clutching his grazed shoulder, spat weakly. "I didn't think they'd follow me. They'd never leave their territory. You gotta believe me. I'm the one that's been wronged. They forced me to dig silver for them. I only took what was rightfully mine." Zachary glared. "It doesn't matter who's right or wrong. They'll kill all of us if they catch up." Evelyn's entire body shook with rage and the aftermath of terror. "I don't care about your silver, Coulter. I only care about reaching the Painted Hills. If you jeopardize that again, I'll put a bullet in you myself." She expected him to cower, but Coulter only stared at her with a haunted expression. "My stash is hidden in a ruin near your Painted Hills. If you help me get it, I'll share. You'll have enough to pay off any debt and more." She didn't want his stolen riches, but a flicker of temptation danced in her mind. What if her father owed more than she could handle? The desert was a formidable enemy, yes, but money, or silver, could buy supplies, water, everything she might need to survive and hold on to her father's last vestige of land. The moral weight of the situation settled over her. Risk cooperating with a liar for ill-gotten wealth, or face the desert and the debt on her own. Zachary broke the tension with a grunt. "We don't decide this now. First we rest. If those devils catch us, we won't see the next sunrise." They set a guard rotation. As Evelyn watched the horizon, gun in hand, she fought conflicting urges: a thirst for survival at any cost, and a moral line she never dreamed she'd cross. A harsh wind whipped across the canyon as dusk descended. The setting sun bled crimson light over jagged rocks. They traveled again by night, searching for a route that would bring them closer to the painted hills. Coulter insisted his stash lay in the same direction. Around midnight, the wind became a gale, churning up a sandstorm in the distance. Zachary spotted it first, a towering wall of dust moving like a living thing. "We have to find shelter," he shouted over the rising wind. Evelyn saw the swirling darkness devouring the starlight. Her stomach twisted. Sandstorms in the Arizona desert could strip flesh from bone. They urged the horses onward, scanning the bleak landscape for any fissure or rocky overhang. The storm advanced with alarming speed, wind howling like a demon's lament. Finally, they found a shallow cave in the side of a cliff. With haste, they guided the horses inside, tethering them far enough from the entrance that they wouldn't stampede in terror. Then Evelyn, Zachary, and Coulter crowded deeper into the gloom. The storm struck moments later, roaring outside the cave with a fury that shook the earth. Grit poured into every crevice, covering them in a film of red dust. They wrapped bandanas over their mouths, cowering against the rock. For hours the storm raged, a primordial force of nature. Evelyn felt her heart hammer with primal fear. She doubted dawn would ever come, but come it did, pale and fragile, when the storm finally spent its rage. They stumbled out of the cave into a transformed world. Drifts of sand covered the desert floor where none had been before. Landmarks from the map were half buried or shifted beyond recognition. Zachary frowned at the horizon. The storms changed everything. "We'll have to navigate by the sun and what's left of these rock formations." Her father's map was nearly useless now. It fluttered in Evelyn's shaking hands, corners tattered. All she could do was trust Zachary's instincts and soldier on. What if we're heading in circles? She wondered, fighting despair. The painted hills could be a day's ride away, or a week, if they couldn't find the right pass. Despite the chaos, Coulter seemed oddly energized. "The ruin isn't far, I'm certain. I can feel it. We find that, we find my silver, and maybe your father's land too." His eyes gleamed with a mix of desperation and greed. Zachary snorted in disbelief. "You'd better hope you can recognize it, or we're as good as dead out here." Uncertainty gnawed at Evelyn. The desert demanded sacrifice, and she suspected it would take its due before allowing them passage. They pressed onward for another day through blistering heat, guiding their horses around towering spires of red stone. One horse began limping. Zachary had to walk it most of the morning. Coulter grew pale, complaining of fever from his shoulder wound, and Evelyn felt her own energy fading, as if the sun were draining her lifeblood drop by drop. By high noon, they reached a crumbling structure perched on a rocky ledge, a vestige of ancient native craftsmanship, now collapsed into walls of weathered stone. Coulter almost sobbed with relief. "This is it," he whispered. The place exuded a haunting beauty. Petroglyphs scarred the walls, spirals, animal shapes, mysterious runes. The ceiling had caved in long ago, leaving only half a roof, sand piled in corners like dunes. But in a shadowed alcove a stone chest still rested, chipped and battered. Zachary hung back, watchful. "Check for scorpions," he muttered as Coulter hurried forward. Evelyn, rifle ready, scanned the perimeter. Something about this felt wrong. The desert was too quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. A coil of dread tightened in her gut. Coulter pried open the stone chest. Inside, cloth sacks jingled with silver coins dulled by dust but undeniably real. He let out a strangled laugh. tears streaking his grime-covered cheeks. "It's all here." He turned to Evelyn, brandishing a handful of gleaming coins. "We can pay your father's debts, more than enough, and keep the rest. We." A gunshot cracked like thunder. Coulter's triumph froze. He pitched forward, a dark stain blooming across his chest. From behind the rubble, 2 bandits emerged, survivors of the group that had attacked them at the spring. Their rifles gleamed in the midday sun. One sneered. "Told you we'd find you, Coulter. You can't hide from us in these hills." Evelyn and Zachary dove for cover, returning fire. The ruin became a battlefield. Bullets chipped ancient stone, sending shards tumbling. Coulter lay sprawled, bloodied, still conscious but paralyzed with shock. Zachary cursed as a ricochet skimmed his thigh. Evelyn fired again, forcing one bandit to duck behind a toppled column. Their advantage was minimal. 2 of them, wounded, with limited ammo, against 2 determined killers. And here, in a lonely ruin, there was no escape route except the open desert behind them. Caught in the crossfire, they realized the bandits had them pinned. In a lull of shooting, Evelyn glanced at Coulter, who clung to the chest, breath ragged. His eyes met hers. "Take it," he wheezed, gesturing to the silver. "Pay your debts. Don't let them have it." Evelyn felt her heart lurch. The silver was heavy. She could see the small mountains of coins in the chest, maybe enough to save her father's land and more. But to claim it, they had to fight off these killers, and they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. She looked to Zachary. His face dripped with sweat and desperation. "We can't hold them off forever?" he panted. "But if one of us distracts them, the other might escape with Coulter." Evelyn's gut twisted. She could run. She could save herself and maybe rescue Coulter, but the bandits would eventually track them down. Or if they lingered, the desert might kill them first. She remembered the vow she made to preserve her father's last scrap of legacy. Yet, she also sensed that if they tried to hold this ruin for the sake of stolen silver, they might die for nothing. In that breathless pause, she realized the desert had forced her to see the truth. Some fortunes came at too high a price. Is a dead father's land worth more than a living future? She could not unask that question. Zachary reloaded, gritting his teeth. The next volley from the bandits hammered the stones overhead. One stepped forward, shouting, "Hand over Coulter and the silver, and maybe we'll let the rest of you walk." Evelyn knew the bandits wouldn't keep any promise, but she also recognized that stealing away with the silver was a death sentence. She gave Zachary a desperate look. "We can't keep fighting. We'll die in here, and they'll take it anyway." He looked stricken. "So we just give it up," she swallowed. The ache of thirst and despair hollowed her chest, but a fierce resolve sparked in her eyes. "Coulter's dying. We do what we can to save him. Let's not throw our lives away for blood money." Before Zachary could respond, she crawled to Coulter and pressed a hand to his wound. "Coulter," she whispered, tears prickling her eyes. "We'll try to get you out. But we can't keep the silver. They'll kill us. I'm sorry." Coulter's eyes flickered with regret and acceptance. He forced a nod. "It's cursed anyway," he rasped, coughing. "Never brought me any peace." Evelyn's hands trembled. She dragged Coulter by the arms, helped him to a fragment of wall near the back exit of the ruin. Zachary delivered covering fire, forcing the bandits to take cover again. Rocks and bullets whined overhead. Then, in a single motion, Evelyn pitched one of the sacks of silver as far from the ruin's entrance as she could. It hit the sand with a metallic clatter. "We're leaving it," she yelled. "Take it and go?" The bandits paused, confusion rippling through them. Evelyn prayed the lure of silver would distract them long enough for an escape. Zachary hoisted Coulter onto his back, staggering under the weight. The blood loss from his own wound made him wobble. Evelyn pressed her shoulder under Coulter's arm, supporting them both. They slipped out a back gap in the ruin as the bandits rushed forward to claim the scattered coins. Sand crunched beneath their boots, adrenaline pounding. One of the outlaws realized what was happening and fired after them, cursing. The shot fell wide. They made it behind a large boulder, hearts hammering. Zachary gestured for the horses, which were tied near the ruin's far side. The animals were spooked, but still there. Evelyn helped lift Coulter onto one. Zachary lurched onto the second. Gunshots crackled behind them, but the bandits seemed more interested in collecting the silver from the chest. With a final glance at the ruin, where the desert wind sighed through ancient stones, Evelyn mounted behind Zachary, clutching the horse's flank. They galloped away into the blazing noon sun, leaving behind the glint of ill-gotten treasure and the memory of gunfire echoing off canyon walls. They rode hard for miles until sure the bandits were not in pursuit. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and found themselves gazing upon the painted hills, a surreal panorama of layered reds, oranges, and yellows streaking across desert ridges. It looked like a landscape from a dream, or a cautionary tale of beauty concealing danger. Yet there it was, the place her father had named in his final letter. They came upon a humble outcropping of rock that formed a half shell of shade. Zachary eased Coulter down from the saddle. The man was barely conscious, face etched with pain. Evelyn stooped beside him, forcing water between his cracked lips. He coughed and moaned, but his eyes fluttered open. "Thank you," he rasped, voice weak. "You saved me. You could have left me for them." Evelyn exhaled, her own tears glimmering. "We're no killers. The desert's cruel enough without us becoming part of it." She turned to Zachary. "What now?" "The map's worthless. We don't have the silver to pay the debt." Her voice wavered with sorrow and exhaustion. Zachary put a hand on her shoulder, wincing at his own injury. "Listen," he said quietly. "You crossed the desert. You survived. There's a small frontier town another day's ride west. You can telegraph or arrange credit to settle your father's account. They'll not likely seize land in the middle of nowhere so quickly. Maybe there's a way forward." She watched the painted hills glow in the late sun, remembering the illusions that had driven her father. Maybe the land itself was worthless, or maybe it held hidden worth beyond money. Perhaps it was a chance for her to build something of her own, free of her father's mistakes. Zachary's voice softened. "I'll ride with you. If you want the company, I'm not cut out for running from ghosts forever. Maybe I can help you make something here." A strange warmth bloomed in her chest. This man, haunted by regrets, had shown her loyalty when the desert demanded only self-preservation. She reached for his hand, ignoring the grime and blood. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's build something better." Together they helped Coulter to a horse, setting off slowly, the horizon tinted with gold. Behind them, the painted hills stood timeless and waiting. Ahead, the desert wind whispered of new beginnings. For those brave enough to endure, some dreams shine like treasure in the scorching sun, but the desert tests every claim until only truth remains. In a land so unforgiving, survival is not measured by gold or land titles, but by the courage to protect one another and the resolve to never abandon your own humanity. Sometimes, when we sacrifice greed for compassion, we discover the real riches that guide us home. Thank you for journeying through the desert with Evelyn and Zachary. If this tale stirred something in your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on courage, redemption, and the power of hope in the comments below. Your voice keeps these stories alive, riding onward across the open range. Safe travels!